YouTube. So it's that time. We're going to do version 2 today of a review of the channel Professor Dave Explains, otherwise known as Professor Dave. But on this channel, he's known as Dogmatic Dave. And so for those of you who don't recognize the gentleman's face on the screen right here, this is Professor Dave, otherwise known as Dogmatic Dave, and he is a very large YouTube channel. Again, he has, probably approaching 3 million, 2.87 million subscribers at this point. And he is a quote unquote science channel, claims to be a professor, puts out a lot of content on scientific topics, and as well as, non-scientific topics like, I think he even puts out a little bit of political stuff, gets into philosophy, things like that. But Professor Dave provides a lot of content around science, scientific topics, biology, chemistry, cosmology, physics, on and on and on. And so the reason for this video is because this is video 2 in a 2-part series where I'm doing a review of this particular video. In this particular video, Dogmatic Dave is responding to another channel named Formscapes. And Formscapes was a channel who put out a video a couple months ago around the dogmatic nature of the modern scientific community and the dogmatism that exists within these institutions and research institutions and academia and the people in these arenas, and the professors and people that come out of these institutions, that I really don't think at this point how it's even controversial. A lot of what Formscapes was bringing up, I think it's pretty obvious. There is a lot of dogmatism in the scientific community, and not only dogmatism, but just fraud. There's a lot of fraudulent, untruthful and there's a bit of untrustworthiness from the general public when it comes to a lot of these institutions, and rightfully so. There's a lot of skepticism, in my opinion. And so Dogmatic Dave provided a video whereby he was responding to Formscapes' video. Formscapes brought up Dave as an example of a character who pushes narratives of mainstream narratives, and is a dogmatic in his beliefs when it comes to a lot of these mainstream narratives and things that are talked about and things that are in the textbooks and what's pushed and so on. And so today I'm gonna do a video and a review of focusing on the first 20 minutes of this video. And really, I only think it takes, it really only takes the first few minutes, but we're gonna focus on the first 20 minutes of this video, whereas in the version 2, or the original video that I did a response to a few days ago, that was hitting on this video a little bit, but really showing Dogmatic Dave's dogmatism when it came to a past video, and coming at a different angle than what Formscapes was looking at, and coming at it more from a past video, just to demonstrate how there's many different videos you can look at when it comes to this channel, and just show and demonstrate the level of just narrative pushing and dogmatism. So if you want to look at that other video, that's on my channel, but it goes into a COVID video, a pandemic video around the coronavirus from 2020, and just how wrong Dave was on certain things. But today we're going to focus on this video. And again, I'm only going to focus on the first maybe 20-25 minutes of this video. This video is an hour long. It would take a lot of time to do an entire hour video review. So I'm not going to do everything. You can't hit on all the points. And really, I think it only needs the first 20 minutes of this video to completely demonstrate how right Formscapes is and how right it is for people to be skeptical of academia in general. It's actually a form of quality scientific thought to have skepticism and to question things and to think outside the box and things like that. But really, we're going to demonstrate from a lot of different angles the dogmatism, the amount of fraud, just all kinds of points to prove what Formscapes and a lot of us believe is that there is a massive amount of there's just a big dogmatic nature to the current scientific community. But we'll go ahead and get into it. This is going to be fun. So I'll stop the video at various places just to bring up a lot of points. I mean, it would take probably 2.5 hours to address everything that Dave's bringing up. So there's not a lot. You can't address everything, but I don't really think it's needed anyway. But here we go. Let's get started.
Hey everyone, you may remember some debunks I've made regarding electric universe and other pseudoscience in the realm of astrophysics. While they don't create as big a stir as my content exposing creationists, they do result in some butthurt contrarians making videos whining about how indoctrinated I am.
The first thing I would like to point out for those of you who may not be familiar with Dogmatic Dave is that just in general, Dogmatic Dave is very immature. He does not come off and speak like an intellectual, someone who is as smart as he thinks he is. I mean, actual high IQ people don't use terms like butthurt. They don't cuss a lot. They're very coherent in their arguments. They're very calm with how they discuss things with people. I mean, he just comes off as an immature child in a lot of his videos. He calls a moron, Formscapes a moron. He cusses again, just using vulgarity, and he uses a lot of straw men in this video too, which is one of the reasons why this video is going to be fairly long. But you can't address everything because there's just so much manipulation and nonsense to address. But to address another point, he is very dogmatic, or at the very least, he absolutely pushes dogmatism. So,
One such video has surfaced recently, and I'd like to dissect it for you, so let's get started. The video is called How Science Became Unscientific, released last month on a channel called Formscapes.
I would highly recommend anybody. This is the second time I'm recommending this video. Recommended it in my previous video, but I would highly recommend anybody to watch this video. It is a long video, so it's an hour and 50 minutes, approaching 2 hours, but it provides a lot of good content. It's very interesting. I think it's presented well, provides a lot of evidence for, the point that Formscapes was trying to make, that I think a lot of people, I'm not even sure how this is much of a controversy at this point, but just the level of dogmatism in academia and scientific institutions and things like that. Again, not saying I agree with everything, not saying Formscapes is right about everything, but a very well done video that provides solid evidence that we'll get into some of this as the video goes on around the just dogmatic nature of people like Dave, of academic institutions, all that.
It's a small channel, and the video didn't really get a lot of views, so I would normally ignore it just like I would any random flat earther. But in this case, I wanted to respond because it's such an immaculate example of the precise brand of anti-science rhetoric that is rampant in society today.
So this was another point that I addressed in the previous video, but he just talks about an immaculate example of the massive amount of anti-scientific rhetoric that is alive and well today. I mean, just the title of his video is "Science Isn't Dogma, You're Just Stupid." I mean, if you go to the later parts of this video, he does a jingle where he actually sings this phrase, which is it's a rhetorical jingle. Later on in this video, he also, uses a child's toy to just hit it and drive it home to Formscapes how, no matter how much he tries to address, certain aspects of Formscapes videos and bring up certain points, but it's like putting a a round peg in a square hole, or a square peg in a round hole, and he's actually using, a very scientific child's plaything. So I'm not going to demonstrate the amount of rhetoric that Dave uses, however amusing a lot of it is. I think Dave is honestly a bit of an entertainer. He is not a professor. He's an entertainer. But we're gonna harp in on some other things in this video today. But I just felt the need to talk about this point again.
It's a manipulative epistemological poison that has the potential to kill off the human race.
Yeah, I also addressed this point too in my other video, whereby, what's going to kill off the human race is people questioning science, and and using horrible scientific rhetoric that just questions science, because that's going to kill off the human race, not wars or the moral decay of a society, or political strife, or nuclear weapons, or I mean, it's just rhetoric. It's anti-scientific rhetoric. That's what we need to worry about, folks.
And it's alarming how popular this type of narrative has become, even among moderately educated people. The basic premise is that real science, the kind that has given you the computer and internet and satellites that are allowing you to watch this video right now, is dogmatic.
Yeah, again, another point that I address. Nobody really debates, engineering, architecture, things like that, where we know how to build things really tall that don't fall over, and we've known how to do that since, for a long time. We know how to build combustion engines. And not only do we know how to build combustion engines, you don't need a PhD to do it. I have a buddy who has the highest level of education he has is a GED. He took over his dad's mechanic shop, and he can literally build engines, and he didn't even graduate undergrad. He doesn't even have an associate's degree, and he can literally build an engine. Nobody argues for engineering and computer programming and things that we know that obviously work. What we debate are, the efficacies of certain prescriptions and drugs to sicknesses that maybe, the people who are pushing them, however educated they may be, there's a conflict of interest, or theories within cosmology or biology or history or anything like that have constantly changed. And not only constantly change, they've either not predicted something, or their predictions have been wrong. You should absolutely question things like that. That's one of the, you need to observe things and use the scientific method. But I mean, it's just more rhetoric from Dave.
An ideology, a tyrannical worldview wielded by the powers that be to indoctrinate us, while ignoring newer, better theories from super awesome rogue trailblazers. The part of the video where he talks about me is towards the end, regarding my very first debunk on Electric Universe, but there's quite a lot of build-up, so let's leave that for the cherry on top and start from the beginning. Wow, lots of ancient stuff. I can see how he fell for the Thunderbolt's charlatans. Let's get a quick sampling of his general vibe.
Rhetoric. I mean, just clearly not as talented of a commentator as yours truly.
Not realistic to expect a 2-hour-long video to convince most people that their most basic convictions about the world might be deeply distorted. Those convictions serve a very real and significant psychological purpose in establishing a person's sense of groundedness and certainty about the world that they are a part of. And letting go of those convictions is far from easy or trivial for very good reasons. For many people, this video will probably feel like I am attempting to shatter the core beliefs which ground one's sense of religious faith.
This is how cult leaders talk. They feed you the narrative that everything you know is a lie, so that you are receptive to the script of lies they are about to unload. And the first part of this script is about a guy named Robert Maxwell.
I mean, just more rhetoric. Literally calls the guy a cult leader. Formscapes nowhere in the video tries to create a new religion, or divert from a current religion, or have followers, or create a commune, or anything like that. I mean, it's just, again, a little bit of Dave goes a long way. It would be exhausting doing this entire hour-long video, but just again, just more rhetoric, more rhetoric of a guy questioning things you don't like. Dogmatic Dave.
The one-time owner of Pergamon Press, a popular platform for scientific publications, and the only purpose here is to manipulate the viewer.
It is through Robert Maxwell's business career in publishing that the world of academic journalism as we now know it would come into being. This was a very lucrative business model, as Maxwell's clients were predominantly state-funded institutions such as libraries and universities. Ultimately, it was taxpayers who fronted the bill for such exclusive access to these academic publications, even though the general public itself was not granted public access to them. And through this monopolization of access, Robert Maxwell and his family were able to become grotesquely affluent. Maxwell was well known to live an immensely flamboyant lifestyle, sailing the world in his luxury mega yacht named the Lady Ghislaine, named after his youngest daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell. Over the course of subsequent decades, Robert would expand his interests into the realm of international politics, developing relations with Eastern European totalitarian regimes and becoming involved with Israeli state intelligence services. In 1991, Maxwell would skip a scheduled meeting with the Bank of England to cruise in his yacht among the Canary Islands, and during this time he would be reported missing, later to be found dead floating in the Atlantic Ocean. Following his death, investigations would come to reveal an immense and tangled web of fraud, financial malpractice, and theft, which would result in the utter collapse of his business empire. What is significant for our current purposes is that Robert Maxwell was the man who was, in many ways, responsible for how academic science came to be shaped after the end of the Second World War.
Remember that statement. The whole reason he's bringing up Robert Maxwell is to prove or to provide evidence for how modern post-World War II academic publications, scientific publications, how that operates now in the modern world. Not who created it, not when it was created, but who influenced it and who had a say in how it operates post-World War II in the modern age. Just remember that.
As he notes, Maxwell enriched himself by running scientific journals, then eventually fell out with the law and died a suspicious death. A picture of his famous daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell, of Jeffrey Epstein fame, is flashed to add more drama to the implied conclusion. Scientific publishing is a racket associated with embezzlement and child sex trafficking.
No, but there's clearly evidence here that shows that, at the very least, there's sketchy individuals involved with it. Nowhere did he say the entire publishing industry of scientific endeavors and magazines and publishing is a complete racket. But those who have been, there is evidence that those have been in and around it are extremely questionable individuals.
Any reasonable person would ask, why fixate on Maxwell? Did Maxwell create the scientific publishing industry?
Straw man. He didn't say that Robert Maxwell created it. Again, he said that he helped shape it post-World War II in the modern era. That's called a straw man, Professor Dave. You have videos on philosophy and argumentation. You might want to read philosophy. Go watch your own videos.
Of course not. It has existed for centuries, and there are many other far more important publishing houses than Pergamon Press.
Again, Robert Maxwell was brought up as evidence that clearly there's questionable individuals that are involved in the post-World War II modern publishing of the scientific publishing industry. It's irrelevant that Springer existed in 1842 or that Cambridge University Press existed in 1534. He was literally talking about the modern era, Dave, Dogmatic Dave.
Did he have a disproportionate influence on the way publishing is done? Not by any stretch of the imagination, but Formscapes reduces the entire industry to one man in order to instill in the naive viewer the impression of widespread corruption in the science world.
Notice how he doesn't substantiate what he just said. No, Robert Maxwell doesn't have, an over... more authority than other people, or he's more influential than anyone else. He just says it. Prove it, Dogmatic Dave. You just made a statement that substantiate what you're saying right now. You're not.
It's a sleazy, manipulative tactic. Then he explains how science is published today.
Academic institutions require their researchers to publish research, and academic journals are able to actually charge researchers for publishing their papers. This system works because under most circumstances, the researchers themselves aren't required to actually dip into their own pockets to make such payments to journals. Rather, research grants typically include provisions for such publishing fees, meaning that it is you and I who actually pay for the racketeering practices which were instantiated by Robert Maxwell and those who followed in his footsteps.
There are elements of truth here, but the conclusions are fallacious. Scientific publication involves research paid for by research institutions. This is refereed by scientists who perform this service for free, then entrusted to a journal which publishes the work and charges a fee for people to read it to recover publication costs. The claim that the published work is not freely accessible is more or less correct. The first problem is that the primary literature is typically not available to the general public. Of course, hardly anyone is willing or able to read a paper in the Journal of Theoretical Physics, but Formscapes pretends that science is elitist, as it hides behind exclusive and expensive portals. The second problem is that universities and other research organizations don't have enough funds to subscribe to the expanding bulk of journals, so we are left with a Darwinian race for survival. The best journals are subscribed to, and the others are ignored or accessed only when researchers want to purchase one specific article. It is not an ideal world, but it works. To suggest that this shows corruption in science, or even that this constitutes a racket, is extremely irresponsible.
We're going to demonstrate corruption in science. Rampant corruption in science. That's coming up. Just, racketeering and all that other stuff. Don't even need it. Don't even worry about it. Probably, let's just assume it's not true for this argument. But corruption, fraud within the scientific community, yeah, we're going to demonstrate it. We're going to demonstrate it, and it's one of the reasons why there's so much. It's one of the reasons why we're only focusing on the first 20 minutes of this video.
The process of reliable scientific publication costs money to provide, so it costs money to consume. It's like complaining that Netflix isn't free. They need money to make the content, so they charge you to watch it. Nevertheless, they are legitimate problems, and to address these problems, free access journals have arisen. Here, scientists and publishers work for free to disseminate their knowledge, but many of these journals are of mediocre quality and poorly refereed. Even in the major journals, the expensive ones, some articles are freely accessible. The author is usually required to pay a small fee to make their article accessible to everyone, and this is happening more and more. In any case, publishing houses, which carry out the important task of organizing the review, refereeing, and publication of our best science, have a right to earn a living, just like doctors and janitors and teachers and everyone else. It's how society works. Finally, the video claims that an author has to pay a fee to the journal before their work is published. This is not true. Could you or I publish a paper in a scientific journal cost-free? Yes, of course, there are plenty of journals which do not charge. However, any paper will be scrutinized by referees and has to meet stringent criteria of novelty and quality. To claim otherwise is a blatant lie. After this idiotic claim of racketeering, the video claims the majority of scientific papers are fraudulent, and there is a replication crisis.
There's absolutely a replication crisis, and this is when the video is going to get good. This is when the review is going to get good. And we are going to thoroughly demonstrate some of the problems and some of the things that Formscapes was discussing. It's going to be a lot.
Scientific work is getting more and more difficult to reproduce.
At this point, we have all probably heard the murmurs of what has come to be dubbed the replication crisis within academic research. The notion of replicability is generally considered to be of central significance within the apologetics of academic science. Idealistically speaking, replication is believed to serve as a means of ensuring that the findings produced by scientific research do actually point towards the regularities of nature which science strives to reveal. If a finding cannot be replicated, then that of course casts doubt on whether the original research actually uncovered such a regularity.
Again, this is very manipulative because it is based on a kernel of truth. As science becomes more sophisticated, it becomes harder to reproduce.
It's based on a kernel of truth. No, it's based on actual truth. And now Dogmatic Dave is going to make a bunch of excuses for why you should ignore the fact that most scientific experiments cannot be reproduced by other scientists. It, Science and scientific experiments and the conclusions that they come from them literally can't be reproduced by the scientific method.
And it is something scientists actually take seriously. The malice lies in presenting this problem as a major crisis in science. Speaking from the little research experience I have, chemistry procedures are hard to reproduce. A chemical reaction may contain a dozen variables, and sometimes one of them is not controlled because
Yeah, where in the scientific method does it say that it's irrelevant to be able to reproduce another person's experiment and observations because they're hard? That's an excuse, Dogmatic Dave. That doesn't eliminate the problem. You're just making excuses for why there is a rampant problem, and we're going to show it. I'm not even going to pull up the article that I used in the last video to show it, which was an article from the University of Southern California in their School of Engineering, whereby they have a team of researchers researching the problem and how to provide a fix to it. That is the reproducibility crisis within science that Dogmatic Dave says isn't a major problem. We'll have some other examples.
it is not clearly identified, and this may result in discrepancies. This phenomenon is well recognized, so it's not a dirty secret. Many experiments are never reproduced because they do not create any particular interest. If the interest exists because of some broad industrial application, the procedures are repeated by many labs, and eventually any discrepancy is solved via well-planned analytical procedures. That's chemistry. Now imagine a science like biology, where experiments may contain dozens or hundreds of variables, or clinical psychology, where thousands of individual factors may affect the quality.
Again, what negates and just makes the scientific method completely irrelevant is the fact that there's too many variables. It's hard to reproduce. Therefore, we shouldn't worry about it. You're making excuses, Dogmatic Dave.
Quality of the results. Why is it surprising that scientific data are difficult to repeat? Important science eventually gets clarified, and less important, flawed experiments remain innocuously in the literature, perhaps until someone decides 100 years later that they were important and they are eventually cleaned up or refuted. Humans are not perfect. Science is not perfect. Imperfection does not make science invalid.
Nowhere does Formscapes say that science is invalid. Again, strawman Dogmatic Dave, he's saying that there's dogmatism within the scientific community and the reproducibility crisis, meaning that most experiments and the results of those experiments can't be reproduced, which is the scientific method, is a problem. And the reason it's not, the reason it takes 100 years, like you just said, takes for something to get corrected in a textbook that could be blatantly wrong, is because there is dogmatism for what is the standard mainstream narrative being pushed right now.
Essentially, this whole narrative only works on people who have never done science and have never read any primary scientific literature. They have absolutely no clue what it is to do and publish scientific research, so they are unencumbered by reality in weaving this ridiculous story.
Again, this is just more rhetoric. This is straw man. All the science I've never read is a scam. Nowhere does Formscape say all the science is a scam. Nowhere does he say science is a scam.
About how all published science is false or agenda-driven. This is a short...
Absolutely agenda-driven. Dave, when there's a lot of money involved and research grants and things like that, you don't think money influences people at all? We're gonna get into that a little bit. We're gonna get into quotes. We're gonna get into the reproducibility crisis. We're gonna get into fraud. We're gonna get into a lot of this stuff.
Shortcut for science deniers with zero ability to refute real science, as it's much easier to just pretend that the scientific community is invalid at its core. In order to substantiate this, some screenshots of cherry-picked fringe essays are flashed, as though the entire body of scientific knowledge can somehow be rendered invalid just by shouting fake news.
So again, this is rhetoric, but Dave is saying Formscapes is just using cherry-picked screenshots of, clickbaity articles from no-name sources that don't mean anything, and that therefore, straw manning into, therefore all of science should not be trusted, and science, everything that science produces, is the entire body of science is just false. No, well, we're going to demonstrate via two different articles and sources, not from the University of Southern California and their School of Engineering that has a team of researchers that was researching the reproducibility crisis. But here's an article from Nature from, when was this article? I believe this is published 2016. This title, 1,500 Scientists Lift the Lid on Reproducibility. Survey sheds light on the crisis rocking research. More than 70% of researchers have tried and failed to reproduce another scientist's experiments, and more than half have failed to reproduce their own experiments. Those are some of the telling figures that emerged from Nature's survey of 1,576 researchers who took a brief online questionnaire on reproducibility in research. The data reveal sometimes contradictory attitudes towards reproducibility, although 52% of those surveyed agree that there is a significant crisis of reproducibility. I mean, that's over 700 that's over 700 researchers. Oh my gosh. Less than 31% think that failure to reproduce published results means that the result is probably wrong, and most say that they still trust the published literature. Yeah, I'm sure they do. There's no conflict of interest there. Yeah, but this is an article from Nature. Literally 1,500 scientists, just a ton of researchers, demonstrating that they can't reproduce the majority of not only other people's research, but their own research. Here's University of Cambridge research article. Let's see, opinion, the science reproducibility crisis and what can be done about it. Reproducibility is the idea that an experiment can be repeated by another scientist and they will get the same result. It is important to show that the claims of any experiment are true and for them to be useful for any further research. However, science appears to have an issue with reproducibility. And literally, Cambridge, the University of Cambridge, is citing the article that I just cited. Literally, this is an article, another established, esteemed university acknowledging and admitting that there's a reproducibility crisis. I mean, just holy mackerel. Continuing.
This idea of most research being wrong is preposterous.
Not preposterous.
Clickbait. Chemists develop new reactions and publish summaries of their methodology. Zoologists discover new species and publish their findings. Molecular biologists sequence genomes and map biomolecule interactions and publish their results. Astronomers discover objects in the night sky and publish images of them. The overwhelming majority of scientific output is not even remotely controversial.
Which is literally not the same thing as actual research and experimentation. The output of a computer program or a theoretical math problem. Like, okay, we're not going to dispute it. The math problem may be correct. That doesn't mean it explains reality. But that's not what we're talking about, Dave. It's not what we're talking about, Dogmatic Dave. Again, just hard to stay on topic.
It's just, here's some stuff we did. Throw it on the pile of human knowledge. Science deniers try to paint all of science as a conspiracy because then they don't have to prove anything wrong.
Again, another straw man. No, that's literally not what we're saying. It's not what we're saying, Dave. You know that. You know that's not what Formscapes was trying to say. Nobody's saying all of science is a scam. No, there's actual science being done, but there's obviously a problem in academia and research institutions, and the mainstream narratives being pushed. And again, we're going to show a level of fraud that exists as well.
They can just point to the conspiracy they fabricated, which is what this guy does for 2 hours. Here is his ridiculous attempt to give a concrete example.
If, for example, I am a sociological researcher who is conducting research which investigates a possible correlation between political beliefs and life expectancy, I could very easily produce research which seems to show such a correlation simply because of inadequate controls. If the majority of the people surveyed are people who live in a specific geographical location, or who predominantly belong to a specific economic class or ethnicity, then it could be that my research findings come up to misleadingly depict a correlation between political beliefs and life expectancy, when in reality the patterns detected by my research are due to factors which I have simply failed to take into consideration.
So he makes something up about sociology, which is not a physical science, and he just lists a bunch of things that sociologists have to control for when doing research, as though they somehow don't know about them and totally do those things. He is pretending that sociologists don't know how to do sociology.
Reality is, of course, extremely complicated, and due to the fundamentally relational nature of reality, it is never actually possible to completely isolate the factors which we wish to study scientifically, which means that there is always going to be a risk of such false positives, no matter how rigorous we try to be.
He says that because reality is relational, it is never actually possible to completely isolate the factors we wish to study. This is totally moronic. If you're studying an ideal gas, the variables that describe it are moles, pressure, temperature, and volume. Hold two constant, measure the isolated relationship of the other two. This is an example from high school chemistry. When molecular biologists do experiments to ascertain something about gene expression or any number of other biological processes, there are painstaking measures in place to control every possible variable with different plasmids that have varying combinations of resistance to one antibiotic or another, presence or lack of a particular gene of interest, internal control vectors, empty vectors, and so forth.
Yeah, we're going to get into medicine and pharmaceuticals and things like that, just to demonstrate the level of dogmatic just fraud and things like that that exists that Formscapes is talking about. We're gonna get into pharmaceuticals, and we have multiple examples within the medical industry around drugs and things like that. So just hold tight for a little bit.
Scientists are clever and know how to isolate variables.
But for now, we simply need to be aware of the fact that even the most thorough and stringent research can and does fall victim to such false positives, and therefore, even if we were able to entirely eradicate fraud and malpractice, it would nonetheless inevitably be the case that many research findings would still fail to replicate.
There is something so enchanting about listening to someone who doesn't understand science improperly describe the scientific process upon a backdrop of stock footage featuring actors who are cosplaying as scientists.
You literally use jingles and child's toys, Dogmatic Dave.
Wow, we looked in a microscope and now I'm pointing to some random meaningless image on my laptop. But the narrator said we didn't properly isolate a variable and nobody can possibly replicate this. Nobody else can look through a microscope like we did. It would be funny if it wasn't so offensive. And now we get to what is supposed to be the payoff of all this.
A great deal of public and professional confidence in scientific research hinges upon the assumption that the research findings which are reported as factual are findings which have been successfully replicated. Beginning with a series of controversies which emerged during the 2010s, however, this confidence would come to be damaged in an utterly catastrophic manner. The replication crisis can be traced back to research published in 2011 by the Cornell University social psychologist Daryl Bim, within which Bim alleged to have produced experimental evidence suggestive of extrasensory perception. Unsurprisingly, Bim was viciously criticized for this research, and in an effort to discredit his findings, Bim's critics highlighted what they regarded as serious methodological flaws in his research. Essentially, these criticisms amounted to the claim that the statistical methods used by Bim in analyzing his data were inadequate. Yet, as Bim pointed out in his response to his critics, the supposed flaw in his research was in fact common practice within psychological, medical, and sociological research in general. If Bim's parapsychological findings were to be thrown out on those methodological grounds, then an enormous amount of psychological, medical, and sociological research would need to be thrown out as well for the exact same reasons.
That's right. All published science is wrong and dumb, which means that pseudoscience that can't manage to get published must be right.
Literally not what he said at all. That's just another straw man. Holy crap, it gets exhausting. It's not what he said at all. He just gave you an example that he believes of someone who was shut down trying to publish work. This is where it's going to get interesting, folks. So here we go.
This guy, Daryl Bem, pretended to have evidence of ESP. Of course, scientists pointed out what was wrong with his methodology, but the narrator basically pretends that he was unfairly debunked.
Yeah, this guy Bim believed that he had something, around parapsychology and all this kind of stuff. I mean, just dismissing Daryl Bim as if he's just some nobody, just this guy. More rhetoric from Professor Dave. Well, who is Daryl Bim? Daryl J. Bim is a social psychologist and professor emeritus at Cornell University. I mean, literally, he received his BA in physics from Reed College, and he obtained his PhD in social psychology from the University of Michigan. He literally was involved in Cornell University from 1978 until 2007, becoming a professor emeritus in 2007. Literally not just some guy, an actual professor, unlike Dogmatic Dave, someone who actually has a PhD, someone who has a BA in physics, someone who was an actual professor. I mean, it's just this guy, just some random guy that is easily discredited.
There is no attempt to elaborate or actually discuss the study because he has no clue and his viewers don't care. In actuality, what happened is precisely what I described earlier. Publishing ESP results is a bold claim, so bold that many people tried to reproduce the results. Reproducibility in a social science like psychology is much more complex than with a simple chemical reaction.
Are you bringing up the reproducibility crisis that you just said didn't exist, Dogmatic Dave, and then try to use that, being able to reproduce Daryl Bim's experiment, as not having proof for his claim? Is that what you're trying to do there? Is that what you're trying to do? So it's almost as if it's important to be able to reproduce, even in a social psychological, in social psychology.
So a lot of studies tried to do it. Absolutely nobody could, so it was labeled bad science. Formscapes wants to label this process corruption, but it's the opposite of corruption.
Okay, so this is where we're going to start getting into the actual corruption and just massive amount of fraud and stuff related to science and mainstream narratives. He he rightfully, in this example, points out that there is a reproducibility problem when other researchers can't reproduce your work, even in social psychology. Okay, well, here's just a few examples of the massive amount of just questionable research papers and data and things that are going on in academia, research institutions, in the scientific fields, and these people, the individuals in them. Here's the professor of Stanford, or the president of Stanford. Stanford president will resign after report found flaws in his research. I mean, this is recent. This is from July 2023, where the review conducted by an outside panel of scientists refuted the most serious claim involving the doctor's work that an important 2009 Alzheimer's study was the subject of an investigation that found falsified data and that Dr. Tesser-Levine had covered it up. The panel concluded that the claims appear to be mistaken and that there was no evidence of falsified data or that Dr. Tesser-Levine had otherwise engaged in fraud, but the review also stated that the 2009 study conducted while he was an executive at the biotech company Genentech had multiple problems and fell below customary standards of scientific rigor and process, especially for such a potentially important paper. Literally, the president of Stanford had to step down because of alleged problems. Potential fraud, maybe not fraud, but clearly problems with research that he had done. Here's another article from June 2023. Harvard professor who studies dishonesty is accused of falsifying data. This is hilarious. This is comedy. Francesca Gina, a prominent professor at Harvard Business School known for researching dishonesty and unethical behavior, has been accused of submitting work that contained falsified results. Gina has authored dozens of captivating studies in the field of behavioral science, consulting for some of the world's biggest companies like Goldman Sachs and Google, how unsurprising, as well as dispensing advice on news outlets like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and even NPR. How unsurprising. Literally a Harvard professor has been accused of falsifying data. Speaking of Harvard and staying in the same vein, the president of Harvard University had to step down due to accusations of plagiarism. Claudine Gay faced backlash over the university's response to anti-Semitism on campus, which led to increased scrutiny of her academic record. When was this? This is actually January 2024. Okay, well, let's just keep it, within the last 10 years, but we're gonna jump around a little bit. Here's an article from Science. From science.org, Cornell nutrition scientist resigns after retractions and research misconduct finding. Misreporting and sloppy statistics undermine flashy findings on unconscious eating habits. Brian Wanzink, the Cornell University nutrition researcher known for probing the psychology behind human eating habits, has resigned after a university misconduct investigation and following the retraction this week of 6 of his papers. Wow, 6 papers. Here's a probe by Ohio State University, Mrs. Fraud. Terry Elton, a professor in Ohio State University's College of Pharmacy, has retracted 6 published research papers, the Columbus Dispatch reports. Federal officials found evidence that more than 100 researchers nationwide committed misconduct over the past decade, and experts are certain that universities and other institutions underreport that fraud, which comes at an untold cost to taxpayers. Ohio State University came close to becoming an example of underreporting. The university's investigation of research misconduct by a pharmacy professor failed at first to recognize his deception, according to documents obtained by the Dispatch. Wowzas. When was this? This was January 5th, 2013. Let's venture off into physics. The New York Times article from October 15, 2002. At Lawrence Berkeley, physicists say a colleague took them for a ride. So you can read this article. It's actually pretty long, but apparently a physicist allegedly falsified data of finding or discovering new elements. You can read, but I'll just focus on these last couple of sentences here. By now, Dr. Loveland had learned to use the special software. He was stunned when the team couldn't find the pattern that Dr. Ninov had reported. Victor was really one of the world's experts in doing this kind of analysis and using the program, Dr. Loveland said. It was clear that something was terribly, terribly wrong. In the next few weeks, a second review committee scrutinized the experiments. It could not find any of the decay claims Dr. Ninov claimed were in the original raw data. They couldn't reproduce the original claims by Dr. Ninov. I mean, why would you falsify, important studies like this that obviously aren't motivated by money or esteem or prestige or tenure or anything like that? ABC News article from 2008. Fusion scientists reprimanded for misconduct. Purdue University has reprimanded a scientist who has been accused of falsifying claims he produced nuclear fusion in tabletop experiments. Oh, I mean, it's probably because other researchers couldn't reproduce it. Dogmatic Dave. Oh, man. So let's actually get into, you could keep going on and on with a lot of this stuff, but let's actually get a couple of quotes from actual doctors and scientists in the medical field around some of the research and pharmaceutical companies and things like that. So here are 2 quotes. One is from, the first one is from Dr. Marcia Engel. And I quote, "It is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as editor of the New England Journal of Medicine." Dr. Marcia Engel. Well, who is that, Dave? Is this just some random clickbaity person? No. Dr. Marcia Engel is an American physician, author, and the first woman to serve as editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine. She is currently a senior lecturer in the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine at Harvard Medical School in Boston, Massachusetts. Here's another quote. This is more recently, Dr. Richard Horton, editor of The Lancet, wrote that the case against science is straightforward. Much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may simply be untrue, afflicted by studies with small sample sizes, tiny effects, invalid exploratory analysis, and flagrant conflicts of interest, together with an obsession for pursuing fashionable trends of dubious importance. Science has taken a turn towards darkness. Who is Richard Horton? Well, Dr. Richard Horton is editor-in-chief of The Lancet, a United Kingdom-based medical journal. He is an honorary professor at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, University College London, and the University of Oslo. Yeah, it's not me and Formscapes that are telling you that there's a problem. It's literally people in these fields. Literally people in these fields. I mean, there's other quotes. Here's one from Linus Pauling. Nobel Prize winner in chemistry warns about the series of cancer studies conducted at the Mayo Clinic. The Mayo article is misleading and dishonest. It might be described as fraudulent. It purported to be a representation of Dr. Cameron's study, but it was greatly different in a way that the Mayo Clinic investigators succeeded in hiding from the readers of their papers. Well, who is Linus Pauling, Dogmatic Dave? Linus Carl Pauling was an American chemist, biochemist, chemical engineer, peace activist, author, and educator. He published more than 1,200 papers and books, of which 850 deal with scientific topics. New Science called him one of the 20 greatest scientists of all time. Literally. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Here's a funny one. This is actually this came up recently when when an anthropologist at the who's a PhD, by the way, Gabby Yearwood, was asked if, getting into transgenderism and things like that, asked if 100 years from now you could tell the difference between male bones and female bones. I mean, just look at this exchange with a PhD anthropologist from Pittsburgh.
Which anthropology is the study of human civilization.
Human, biological and social.
So if you were to dig up a human, two humans, and 100 years from now, both man and woman, could you tell the difference? Strictly off of bones.
No, because there's a wide range.
Literally, if you can't hear that because of the audio, hopefully my audio is better, by the way. Riley Gaines, a swimmer who's been on the news and all that, forget politics, asked this professor, this PhD level anthropologist from Pittsburgh, if 100 years from now, if you could tell the difference between male bones and female bones if you dug them up. And the PhD anthropologist said no. That's literally the exchange. I mean, just unbelievable. Unbelievable. Here's a really good example too of the fraud that exists in evolution. This is going back to the 1920s, by the way. I mean, this is nothing new. This is literally nothing new. I'm sure this is one of Dogmatic Dave's favorite human beings, Richard Dawkins, PhD from Oxford, I believe, engaging with a creationist, regardless of if she's a creationist or she's an evangelical or she's a Christian, and this is Christianity versus science. Forget all that. Just listen to what Richard Dawkins admits when fraud is brought up to him.
Is that in the past, when there's been great acclaim of a discovery to show from one species to another, it's been proven to be fraudulent. So evolutionists have a problem in their own history. The fact that there have been so many cases of fraud or misinterpretation of information that now we have a problem believing what.
Yeah. I mean, solid point there, Wendy.
Say.
There was the Piltdown Man in the 1920s.
Example, in the 1920s.
I suggest we forget about the 1920s and look at today. Go and look.
Yeah, I bet you do, Dawkins. I bet you do, Richard Dawkins. Bet you do, Dick. I suggest we forget the 1920s. You know why? Because that's not the only example of fraud that exists. That's literally Richard Dawkins, PhD from Oxford, I believe, admitting and literally giving an example of one of the examples of fraud just within evolution. You know, I mean, this could just go on and on and on. But let's get back to Dogmatic Dave. Let's get back to the last few minutes of the first part of this video.
It's precisely how science works. Sometimes extraordinary claims get published, even in fields like chemistry or physics. Fedyakin's polywater sensation in 1961, Benveniste and water memory in 1988, Fleischmann and Pons's cold fusion in 1989. These are glamorous examples that the press sometimes runs with in an irresponsible way.
Not only the press, the scientific community.
Because of the extraordinary nature of the claims, they were scrutinized, demonstrated to be irreproducible despite countless attempts.
Again, citing the fact that reproducibility is important regardless of how hard it is to reproduce, Dave.
And thereby invalidated. If extraordinary claims were to represent real viable phenomena, reproduction of results would occur, they would be deemed revolutionary, and scientists would pursue them eagerly, as has also happened many times in the history of science. It's not that hard to wrap your head around a scientist chasing their own ego in presenting themselves as the harbinger of scientific revolution. Even highly respected and eminent ones, hence the so-called Nobel disease. In stark contrast, the idea that scientists would collectively hide new discoveries because they contradict current paradigms is just an asinine narrative to excuse delusional behavior.
Nobody said they're hiding anything. No, the problems are there. They're just ignored or explained away, or they're just made irrelevant. Nobody made the claim that anything's being hidden, you know, and even if it, and you know, it's irrelevant. The fraud has clearly been demonstrated.
Behavior. Here he is again, just pasting clickbait titles from magazines as though they adequately address science, while mixing in some pandemic-related paranoia for good measure. This is very deliberate, as he is now going to pivot to medical science.
The phrase, trust the science, is sometimes repeated like a kind of shibboleth or mantra.
Nobody who advocates for science has ever said, trust the science.
Really, Dave? Really? This is literally Dave. This is literally the last video that I reviewed for Dave. Just nobody who advocates for science has ever said trust the science. Okay.
The man is ridiculous. The scientific community should be trusted above all other sources.
Literally. I mean, just again, there's your dogma. There's your that's there you go. A little more wordy. But there's your trust the science, Dave. There it is right there. You literally, you have said that. You have literally said that. Oh my goodness. I mean, again, we're almost 18 minutes in. This would literally take hours upon hours to do. But hopefully the point has been demonstrated. And I'm going to do, you know, this is not my only review that I'm going to do of Dogmatic Dave and just his nonsense on his channel. I find Dogmatic Dave very entertaining. I find him, you know, I find this fun, but it is just exhausting. Anyway, I know this is a long video, but I hope this kind of hammered the point home. Good job, Formscapes. Keep producing solid content, but yeah, I hope this was entertaining. I appreciate anyone listening, and we'll see you next time.